Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto formed his own pirate crew. Deep in the bowels of Impel Down, the world's most dangerous criminals are jailed and left to rot within 6 levels of hell. However, housed in the lowest level of hell, he is set free. Now, the last remnant of an old era has been set loose upon the world, but why is he so fascinated by ramen? Set during Impel Down Arc and beyond. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 8, of Gods and Men. Alright you dogs, listen up. This is an order from your captain. Naruto's voice thundered across the frozen tundra, making itself known to all alongside his wild, ear-splitting smile. I hereby order you, each and every one of you, to go wild. 2 words. A simple order. A declaration. That was all. And yet the response couldn't have been swifter. In the time it took for him to finish forming that sentence and close his mouth, Zaraki, Sasuke, and even Tenten had already took out their weapons out, or in the third's case, knives, drawing swords, before he could order them otherwise. The sight of that alone evoked utter panic in the Marines, fear rippling through their ranks in unseen waves as they beheld the deadly marauders assembled before them. They didn't even have wherewithal to retreat. Die! Assholes! Tayuya was the first to draw blood, her ordinarily crass voice lashing out in a sonic scream that bent the galleon's hull and splintered ice in every direction. Those fool enough to fall within earshot suffered greatly. They experienced internal hemorrhaging on a massive scale as their organs burst and ruptured within their own bodies, leaving them utterly powerless to her second volley. When the shockwave hit, they could only blunder to their doom, screaming as the ice shattered beneath their feet and sent them plummeting into the frigid waters of the bay. First blood, bitches. She grinned. Those that could swim soon found themselves wishing they hadn't, because a hail of weaponry descended from the skies to take their lives. A dreadful shower of forks, knives, sharpened shards of wood, steel, anything and everything with any sort of edge fell upon them, skewering arms, legs, and in many cases, heads. Tenten smiled as she observed her heinous handiwork. The time she'd spent aboard the galleon during their journey had not been wasted. In the ensuing seconds, she lived up to her title of shoot anything, hurling all manner of weapons, some mundane, others improvised into the incapacitated horde Tayuya's shout had left behind for her with frightening accuracy. Second, the brunette chirruped happily. Trapped between the weapon fire and that god-awful wailing, most were cut to ribbons almost instantly. Those few that somehow managed to withstand Tayuya's deadly voice and evade Tenten's inhuman sights found themselves at the mercy of Kenpachi and Sasuke's blades. There was no quarter to be had there either. The waters of the bay were soon stained red with marine blood. It was almost too easy. Where were the officers and the vice-admirals? Surely, they hadn't gone down so easily. Unless... Sasuke frowned at the realization. Something's wrong. Shay. Zaraki scoffed in agreement, glancing at his now bloodied blade. What the hell is this? They're nothing but small fry. You're just too strong, Kenchan. Yuichiro beamed from atop his shoulder. Indeed, it could be said that for every Marine the Wraiths hadn't slain, they'd done the most damage, incapacitating nearly a fourth of the soldiers alone and leaving the others utterly terrified with their brutal display of teamwork. What remained was left in utter disarray, retreating shrieking to higher ground despite the orders of their superiors to stay and fight. A dull boom rumbled from somewhere beyond the courtyard, signaling the deployment of cannons to the battlefield. Alas, that was before May exhaled, expelling a mist so acidic that it could melt the flesh off a grown man. And it did just that. Naruto summoned up a gust of wind with a wave of his wrist, blowing the deadly cloud away from his allies and after the retreating enemy force. At first, nothing happened. Then the screaming started, sounds of dismay and despair trickling back through the foul fog to reward their efforts. Left with nowheres for them to run, the Marine flank was forced to retreat from their retreat, forced away from the searing fog and into the waiting arms of the Wraiths once more. We. The dark-skinned man launched himself forward with a wail of laughter, his body already morphing into something monstrous. Tentacles sprouted where there had once been legs, his skin darkening to a russet red as the horns sprouted from his head, body bulging and swelling as his foes and comrades looked on. Within seconds the ox-octopus Zoan towered over the Marines, its tentacles sweeping them from the ice a blink of the eye later, tossing them ruthlessly toward. Naruto's gaze slid to the next phase of their plan. Hashirama. The shipwright nodded and clasped both hands together, his arms craned in the direction of the floundering soldiers. Kami-sama, he prayed, please forgive me for taking these young lives. Even as they fought to catch their breath, the galleons came alive around them. Literally. Roots erupted from the ship's wood, thousands of angry, writhing tendrils swarming down over the soldiers before they had the chance to even mount a counterattack. Entire platoons were crushed beneath the rapidly growing trees, the great oaks drinking deep of their lives to claim even more. As they looked on, the roots took up larger shapes and forms, creating crude legs by which to move the very vessels themselves. But the old shipwright wasn't entirely reliant upon his abilities alone. Naruto watched him viciously backhand a marine that strayed far too close to their vanguard, snapping the man's neck like a twig. Oi, Yuichiro. Kenpachi rumbled darkly. Get off, it's about to get rough. Hi. Why? Tayuya grunted in surprise as the pinkette clambered off Saraki's back and onto her shoulders. Get off of me, Chibi. I'm not giving you a ride. But her new passenger would not be dislodged so easily. Yuichiro had a death grip on her back and simply would not be dissuaded. Ya damned brat. Fire at will. There was a deep crack of cannon fire and all her struggles were suddenly forgotten, dozens of cannonballs converging on their position in an instant. Sasuke snarled something sinister beneath his breath and became engulfed in violet flames. A towering creature of bone and fire arose from nothingness, its massive ribcage engulfing the crew, its large arms crossing in a phantom X even as the mortar fire reached their position. Their world erupted in a muffled retort, not the massive explosion she'd been expecting. Explosion she might have found it funny, had it not saved their lives. Well, this is new. Tayuya murmured, peeking out from under the indigo veil. Since when can you do that? A long time now. Sasuke replied, his tone only slightly strained. Using it places too much strain on my body, though. Even as he spoke the towering skeleton sagged, its glowing eyes growing dim as the energies the Uchiha supplied were severed. Within seconds it was gone, dissipating into harmless embers as they looked on. Bah, Kenpachi rumbled. That ain't shit. I bet you couldn't kill a dozen men without using your fancy powers. First to 100 kills wins? Sasuke challenged. The swordsman licked his lips. I like the sound of that. Is it too late to change sides? Shikamaru groaned aloud, cringing as the enemy charged towards them. Yes, he had his knuckle blades, but the thought of facing down so many elites without a plan was daunting, to say the least. They had to know he was with Naruto by now. He tried to turn to his captain, but the man had other plans, pausing to address the men and women of his crew. I told you all to go wild, he began, and I meant it. However, our targets are the admirals and the Shichibukai. Excluding Boa Hancock. I've been led to believe that she's an ally, but she'll probably attack any of you on Sai if she sees you. His words rang harsh, but true. Now, I won't blame any of you if you don't want to fight them, but I have faith in you. Each and every one of you. Do whatever it takes to survive. Fight. Live to see tomorrow. Give your enemies nothing, but take from them everything. He punctuated his declaration with a raised fist, defiantly striking the sky. Now that's what I'm talking about. Kenpachi was all but berserk with bloodlust by this point, his eyes carrying that strange golden sheen once more. I'll slaughter them all myself. Yuichiro seemed to be of a similar, albeit lesser mind. Go Kenchan! Sasuke's deadpan was barely concealed. Don't worry, I won't let any of them die. Maybe someone. Die? Killer be feign shock. Baka yoru, kono yoru. Say that again and I'll make you fly. OSU. Tenten saluted smartly. Just leave Akainu to me. Just be sure to come back, alright? Mei's gaze held a touch of softness and perhaps something more? When he looked at her, but it was gone just as swiftly as he saw it. We're nothing without you. Hashirama and Shikamaru were a touch more reserved in their enthusiasm, but the latter seemed to have calmed somewhat. Finally, his gaze turned toward Tayuya. If he thought there had been softness with Mei, then there was an absolute fondness in those hazel orbs. Unlike the others, she actually looked worried for him. Naruto, I'll accompany you. Kabuto volunteered suddenly, cutting her off. I have some business with Shirohige as well. Suit yourself. The blonde shrugged. He risked one last glance back at her, wondering what it was she'd been about to say. Maybe, no. Whatever it was could wait. Good luck, he muttered. I'll return as soon as I'm able. You ass, she grumbled as they whispered away with the winds. Better not get yourself killed. He's coming here, isn't he? Shirohige sighed one more, feeling the weight of his age. It had begun to press down on him as of late. He was getting too damned old for this shit. Naruto and his wraiths were the new age. Perhaps it was time he had someone replace him, time to step down and live out the rest of his life in peace. But today was not that day. The Whitebeard pirates had made no such move to engage these titans, many of which were known to them. Kenpachi Zaraki was a name whispered only of in legends, and Naruto's infamy stood even beyond that. His exploits were many and miraculous. He'd carved his name in a bloody swath across the Grand Line before finally being captured. Although he might have refused to become a part of Newgate's little family, he was still the man's grandson. It was only natural that he wants to keep tabs on them. And those tabs now told him that it was time. Marco frowned as the wind began to pick up, gradually resolving into a familiar form. Pops, isn't that? Gururarara, Whitebeard chortled loudly. The sound was like a small avalanche all its own. Relax, my son. It looks like he wants to talk. Luffy had never run so hard or fast in his life. Marines fell in droves around him, but he didn't care. He just had to get to that execution platform. That was all that mattered. Ace was all that mattered. He never once paused to think that it might be Naruto who was luring the enemy away from him, that he was the reason he hadn't encountered any enemies as of yet. That chat with Whitebeard still weighed heavily on his mind, however. Just what did Ace's old man have to do with Naruto, anyway? Shirohige had said something as much. You came here with my grandson, right? Was Naruto his grandson? If so, then that meant... it was too confusing. Steeling himself, Mujiwara willed strength to his faltering limbs and ran onward. Ace, just hang on a little longer. I'll be taking my leave now, Uzumaki-san. Naruto turned away from the battle to regard Kabuto Yukushi with a friendly, yet wary eye. The Marine had disembarked with him when he'd sent out his crew, but he'd refrained from attacking or even speaking. Until now. Now, when they were far away from the others. He looked perversely pleased with himself, his smile almost serpentine in its intensity. As if he'd seen all that he needed to see, and now was the time to make his escape. Or perhaps a surprise attack? One could never be certain with him. Please tell me you're not going to betray me after all that. Perish the thought. The young man smiled slightly. I'm just going to report to my superior. Impossibly, his grin grew even wider. Madara-sama sends his regards and wishes you victory in your battles. None of the crew would have reacted to that name, however. Naruto felt blood freeze in his veins. Madara? The man who'd broken him out of prison to begin with? Before he could further inquire, Kabuto retreated, first one step, then another, vanishing into the fog of war that they themselves had created. It took everything he had not to follow. Why do I have a bad feeling about this? Sighing, he dissolved himself into wind and hurtled towards the Moby Dick. Edward Newgate was getting old. He didn't have very many years left in him, and his lifespan would likely be shorter still, assuming he survived this battle. But this was one that needed be fought, one that he had tried his utmost to ignore for the last decade. Try as he might, he could put it off no longer. There were only 3 things in which Shirohige had failed. During his lifetime, Minato had been the first. He'd failed to protect his son when he'd needed him the most. Then, years later, he had failed to protect Minato's wife, the younger sister of red-haired Shanks, Kushina. His third and final mistake stood before him now, glaring bloody red daggers into his chest. Uzumaki Naruto. He should have brought the brat with him by force back then, when there was still time. Even if it made the boy hate him more than he did now. Anything would be better than this. Still, he couldn't quite conceal that squint of pride in his gaze when his grandson alighted atop the Moby Dick. Naruto had never set foot upon his flagship before. Those blue eyes, Minato's eyes, took a brief moment to survey his surroundings. Wary, even here in the field of battle. Good. His senses were still sharp after his time spent in Impel Down. Naruto stepped forwards and Marco immediately moved to block him, not willing to risk another incident like the one with Squard. Stubborn fool had tried to stab him, deep in the stomach, all because of some plot by Akainu. Perhaps it was his years of searching for his grandson that had kept Shirohige sharp. Whatever the case, he'd been able to avoid the blade, and calm his stubborn son from doing anything rash. He could very well ill afford to be injured right now, with the battle raging around them. But this was his grandson striding before him, and he feared words would not be enough to calm him. Naruto uttered one word, and one word only. Move. Like hell I will. Stay back, Marco. Whitebeard heard, rather than felt himself rumble. This need to be done. But Pops? Marco. The 1st Division commander visibly wilted under the stare and stepped aside. Naruto elbowed him aside roughly, and then he was there. Each Newgate stood across from one another, both young and old, the herald of a new era on one side, and in remnant of the old on the other. You're looking well, boy. For a long moment, Naruto said nothing. He simply scowled up at his grandfather, mouth clenched. And then. Wham! Pops! Marco cried. Whitebeard grunted, fighting the urge to laugh as the boy's elbow sheathed itself in his gut. There was no current of wind to accompany it, the blow had been a pure punch, through and through. Damn, but he'd felt it, this time. The boy had truly become strong over the years. Better than his father. Better than him. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was a man. Worthy of his power and the Newgate name. Worthy of so much more than he ever would be, if they continued to let this grudge drive a wedge between them. That, the blonde hissed as he took his arm away, was for my mother. I do more, but the way I see it, you don't have much time left. Whitebeard said nothing, finger clenching and unclenching around the shaft of his halberd. If anyone else had dared to touch him like that, they'd be dead now. But Naruto was his blood, and he'd every reason to hold a vendetta against him after all he'd done and failed to do during his young lifetime. But Naruto had just thrown away his opportunity, wasted his one and possibly only chance to kill him. And yet he hadn't done so. For some strange reason, he didn't seem to want him dead. Yet. You're a right pompous ass, you know that? Naruto's words caught him flat-footed, unguarded. Where the hell were you when I needed ya? When my dad, your son, need you? When my mother needed you? When the world came after me for being your grandkid? When Blackbeard ran amok? Don't be a dick and say you were there for me, because you fucking weren't. Not one damned bit. And when you do show up, the fidgeting was over. It's always over. Each time. Every time. Is that it? Hell no. The fire in his grandson's voice actually made Whitebeard flinch. I've been through living hell because of you, And now what do? You go and throw yourself into the biggest damn battle in the history of mankind, all to save one subordinate who didn't listen to you in the first place. Angry tears shone in this sapphire orbs, hot and unabated. You're the only shitty family I've got left now, and you think you can just go and die on me without my saying so? Why did you come here, Gaki? His gaze turned back to the battles raging around him. Where's your crew? A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw. They can take care of themselves. Yeah, ha ha ha. Mihawk barely heard the voice, barely had time to cut down his hapless opponent and disengage before a ragged blade swung down at his head. Even then his subsequent parry still left him with an opening wound. The now thin slice on his cheek wept openly, the first injury he'd sustained in nearly 2 years now. But it wasn't the wound that sent a silent shiver through his body. That blade. That voice. He knew them both well, and a quiet chill swept through him as his next opponent strode forth out of the smoke, his jagged blade swung lazily over one shoulder, his eyes wide and golden with unspeakable power and intent. Oh, if isn't Hawkeye. The madman grinned. Long time no see. Heard you became the best swordsman while I was locked up. Incredibly, that toothy grin only grew. Wonder how good you really are. Kenpachi, Zaraki. The man's only response was to grin and bring the blade crashing down at Mihawk's head. Again, the swordsman parried, but the sheer strength behind that blow set his arms to screaming. He leapt away, but Kenpachi was already upon him, not giving him the distance he so desperately desired. There was no semblance or arte to his defense, it just wasn't even there at all. The man simply attacked and attacked again. As if he didn't care whether he died or not, as if death was merely another phase of life for him, and it took Mihawk entirely out of himself. Oi, what's wrong? Kenefi bellowed back at him, swatting aside the giant black blade with an almost twisted ease. I expected the world's strongest swordsman to do better than this. For the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, Hawkeye Mihawk was actually frightened. Orsolino balked slightly as he missed again. His heel sweeping harmlessly over the man's head. This was odd. Very odd. Incredibly odd. Not only did this strange fellow continue to predict his every attack as though he were crawling at a snail's pace, but he was actually providing him with advice. Advice. A stranger opponent he had never seen. Despite that oddity, this pirate was beginning to worry him. Kazara had long considered his agility to be above all others. No one could surpass the speed of the Pika Pika no Mi. Except this man. You're bending your knee too much at the apex there, Hashirama Senju admonished lightly, the slanted yellow irises of his sage powers narrow and intent as he bobbed and weaved amidst lightspeed blows, raising a hand or lowering a leg to deflect on occasion, the slightest sheen of sweat the only sign that he was truly exerting himself. Perhaps you should try. There it was again. He reacted far too quickly, catching his heel a heartbeat later, stalling him in mid-kick without so much as batting an eyelash. Better, he admitted, wrenching him painfully forward by the leg. But you rely too much on kicking alone. You see, a body is just like a ship. If you mistreat it, the host breaks down. Left untended, for example, if your limb were to twist at a certain angle. Zing! His free hand shot upward, effortlessly blocking the Ama no Murakamo sword. Kazara once more found himself baffled. He'd expected to slice right through, but no. A thin veneer of wood coated the man's hand, keeping his palm whole and intact. Leavinth the lightblade locked helplessly in place. Hashirama heaved a slight sigh. Now, he soothed, I wasn't done giving my lesson. And the bone goes Briac. Arg. A savage squeeze signaled the end of that limb, obliterating the elbow within the muscle. His right leg followed suit seconds later. It wasn't the same as tearing an arm and a leg off. This was worse. Kazara's left arm was utterly useless to him now, the bone shattered within its muscle, and with his right fractured, he wouldn't be performing any more of his high-speed kicks. Mission accomplished. The Senju offered a slight smile as he watched the taller man writhe at his feet. Don't underestimate the elderly, youngster. Don Flamingo considered himself a man of class. Character. Principle. Yes, he was a pirate, but he was also a shichibukai, a man who'd connived and schemed and manipulated others to get where he was now. Just take Dressrosa for example. Now that had been a feat of brilliance, a work of art, if he said so himself. Not one afraid of getting one's hands dirty was good, and Don Flamingo Don Quixote was damned good at what he did. He was willing to do whatever it took to preserve his status there. If it meant subconsciously enslaving the populace, then so be it. If he had to turn half the denizens into toys to further his goals, then so be it. He cared for success, and success alone. There was no room for failure in either his life or organization. How ironic then, that those principles had been thrown out on their ass. The Ito no Mi had been more of a liability than a boon in this battle. His string fruit simply hadn't been able to grasp his opponent for more than a moment at best before she missed it away. Being a Logia simply worked in her favor. With the sea so close she could disappear and reappear at will, using her fog-like mist to burn through his strings thanks in part to her ability. He daren't come closer enough to administer a killing blow, for fear of suffering that very same fate. He had the burns to prove it. That damned kid had chosen his crew well. He'd set himself up with the war's possible opponent. Oi oi, he seethed, you're starting to make me angry here. Deadlock. May Terumi exhaled softly, a thin miasma of fog leaking from her lips. I do so hate killing handsome men. Ararara, where do you think you're going in such a hurry, Mujiwara? Luffy's blood turned to ice water when he heard that voice. No pun intended. Thanks to Naruto's unintentional aid and that of Ivankov, he'd been able to fight his way through the ranks, until this. Now he found himself facing an old foe, the very same man who'd frozen him solid only a few months prior. Rather he would have, were it not for that of a certain Uchiha and lazy Nara bearing his path. Why am I involved in this? Shikamaru bemoaned. Sasuke shrugged, his blade coated in bleak flames. Someone has to make sure the kid makes it to the stand. Man, fuck you. I still fail to see how that should be me. Uchiha Sasuke sighed and raised his blade. Stop talking, here he comes. Everything was falling apart. Their fortifications were collapsing, their flank was all but broken, not even the timely arrival of Sentomaru and the pacifistas had done anything to hamper the wraiths, they'd simply blown through the portly man and his small army of cyborgs. He had no idea what their goal was. Naruto and his crew seemed intent to cause as much chaos as possible. But they hadn't yet reached the courtyard. There was still time to execute Portgas d'Ace and put an end to this farce of an invasion. Now if he could just get past Whitebeard and join the battle. He hissed in pain as a bloody trench opened his chest, the crimson stain virtually invisible amidst his coat. Ever since that boy had set foot in Marineford, he had caught a second wind. If he didn't know better, he'd wager that the old man was actually happy. Inugami Gorin. Halfway across the battle, Shirohige plowed forward, uncaring for the burst of magma that struck him square in the chest. Sakazuki actually started, the man just kept coming. That damned grandson of yours. Edward Newgate spat out a bloody gob, and incredibly, stood up again. His white mustache bristled above his smile, a throat gororara tearing its way out of his throat. Pride swelled in his chest as he watched that boy, pride not just for himself, but that his son's Minato's legacy lived on through his child. His grandson. Gripping his halberd with renewed purpose, the strongest man in the world dragged his aching body upright a second later, rising to his full, towering height. Even wounded he was a fearsome sight. How much more could he take? What had that boy said to him back there to give him such resolve? He's not that easy to kill. Cracks formed as his fist slammed into the air, the tremor fruit wreaking havoc on the battlefield once more. Akaino had only an instant to register that before he was flung forth from his feet, the man's massive hand closing around his throat in a crushing vice. And neither am I. For a long moment Akainu said nothing, his right arm pulsating an eerie shade of scarlet/crimson as he hung there, trapped within the larger man's grasp. Hellhound. A single word hissed through clenched teeth as he brought that arm around, sheathing the molten limb elbow deep in the man's chest. For the first time in nearly a decade Whitebeard staggered. He tasted blood when he breathed. Crippling pain in his chest, numbness in his legs and heat in places where it should not be, heat everywhere. Guh? Halfway across the battlefield, Naruto froze. He felt something lurch in his chest, those all-seeing eyes turning back to regard the underhanded attack. Time seemed to slow, the currents of fate and destiny dragging the moment to a standstill in his eyes. No. Goddammit, no. Old man. He turned, hurricane in hand, only for a glint of steel caught his eye, the blur of thrown metal shooting past him like a small comet. It was gone and past him almost before he realized it, the flying blade arcing end over end as it passed him by. Someone raced after it, snatching a knife up off the battlefield, racing on ahead of him in a blur of black and white. You son of a bitch. Akainu bristled as that familiar voice ripped through his ears. Tenten? Perhaps it was the fact that she was his daughter. Perhaps he simply did think she had it in her to kill him in cold blood. Perhaps a touch of sentiment remained from his days as her father. Whatever the case, Sakazuki found himself entirely unprepared as Tenten leapt upon him, driving both knives deep into his shoulders. The Red Admiral roared in surprise and pain, clutching at the now spurting wounds that adjourned the lengths of his backside. Pain bent him double, but it wasn't just pain of the body, pain at being denied him his chance to finish Whitebeard off. It hurt, knowing that his legacy had finally decided to openly betray him. He'd extended an olive branch in the vain hope that Tenten might come to her senses someday, see the error of her ways. There was no chance of that now. Not now, as his only child drove the knife deeper into his back. Fury roared across his visage, anger overtaking him at the sheer impudence of his own progeny's betrayal. Begone! Time seemed to unfold very slowly at that. One moment Tenten was stabbing her old man with unstoppable fury, the next, she was the one screaming, falling away, clutching at her burned stomach. His attack, it had gone right through her gut, burning its way out the other side in a shower of blood and burned intestines. Her body crumpled to the ground, broken and beaten, her chest no longer rising and falling with life. Kami, the bastard, he'd attacked his own daughter. Gored her, in cold blood. He didn't even know if she was dead. If his grandfather was dead. Something snapped. Akainu, you suicidal bastard. Preview. Time got funny when you were near death. Portgas Ace was certain he would have died multiple times if it were not for the timely intervention of the Wraiths and Whitebeard. Who knew what pitched battles were raging down below, what foes fought unseen? A knot of worry twisted in his gut at the thought, the battle must be going badly if even Sengoku himself had gone down to fight. He could hear the wind shrieking and keening down below, wailing in relief or distress, he knew not. Akainu was probably dead, he must have been, else the fleet admiral wouldn't have gone down there in a panic only moments before. Whomever stood there, whomever wielded the powers of the Kaze no Mi, they were going absolutely berserk in the courtyard. Now, with only Grandpa Garp left guarding him, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to be a hero. Demonic Sonata/10 sword style. Ah. The firebrand blinked as his grandfather's battered body sailed up to join him on the execution stand, his broken hands still twitching towards his groin in a vain attempt to cover the damage that had been wrought too close to his family jewels. That was what happened when you were blasted by a sound wave at point-blank range and kicked in the balls. Seconds later his savior reappeared, dress fluttering in the wind as she alighted a mere millimeter before him. Well, a dulcet voice crooned. That takes care of him. Ace might have been in mortal peril, prepared to die at any moment, but he simply couldn't get over just how goddamned beautiful this woman was. Flowing scarlet hair mirrored a crimson dress, offset by all cream-colored skin, a heart-shaped face and dark eyes. She was the most stunning creature he'd ever seen, gorgeous in her intensity, terrible in her beauty. And then she opened her mouth. Stop staring, fuckface. Ace's jaw promptly dropped to the ground. What? Sup? She raised a hand in greeting. My boss sends his regards. We're here to bust you out. We? He finally became aware of the dark-skinned man standing behind her, his bulky form marred with Bloodgarp's blood-black sunglasses, regarding him intently. Who are? We. The name's Killer Bee. Now it's time to set you free. Yeah, ignore him. He's an idiot. Tayuya said nothing more, quietly kneeling behind him. The click of a key opening the lock was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The last son of Golda Roger felt strength flood his veins, angry embers licking a trail of fire down his flesh as his power came flooding back to him. Grimacing he stood, forcing himself to stand on sleeping legs, his lower body numb from kneeling for so many hours. Power roared through him and he welcomed it with relief. It seemed today wasn't his day to die after all. Thanks, he muttered, rubbing at a raw wrist. Oi, where is your captain, anyway? The redhead turned her gaze aside, her mouth set in a slight grimace. Was that fear or consternation that tightened her brow? He's preoccupied. Chapter 9, Inferno. Marineford was a hurricane and Sakazuki stood in its eye. The wind shouted obscenities at him, roaring and raving nonsensical gibberish as the storm raged around them, walling everyone else out. That suited the man just fine. He had no idea of what was coming his way, couldn't feel the killer intent a mile away. It was so tempting to go after Whitebeard now, to finish the man off, while he was wounded. But even a wounded animal could bite, and knowing Shirohige, the man just might take him with him before he went into that cold black abyss. Still, the temptation was there. Akainu ignored it, his attention remained decisively elsewhere. Because his daughter lay only feet away, her visage a mask of anger and sweat, her hands frantically scrabbling at her stomach in a vain attempt to keep her insides from spilling out onto the frozen ground. TCH. For a moment he'd thought her dead on the spot. But no, she'd lurched back to life, grabbing at her guts almost before she'd hit the ground. Was that seastone chainmail he glimpsed beneath the ragged tear of her shirt? Clever girl, making something like that. Just like her mother. Fuck. She hissed, blood bubbling between clenched teeth. Fuck F-U-C-K. I'm actually going to, Sanuva bitch. The ringlets had done little to absorb something like his magma, but they'd weakened just enough of the blast that his daughter had sustained a survivable hole in her stomach, rather than a mortal, gaping tear in her chest as he'd originally intended. She might live, assuming she received immediate medical attention. Pity she wouldn't be getting it. He raised his arm with intent, magma boiling at the edge of his elbow, searing forth across his bloodied shoulder to meet his hand. They locked eyes then, father and daughter. So that's it, huh? Her words were little more than a growl. Not even a hello dear, or how have you been from you? You're just gonna kill me? You are no longer my daughter. Akainu rumbled, the words deep and hoarse in his throat. You are a pirate, and as a marine, it is my solemn duty to arg. His words ended in a pained hiss as his daughter arched her back and spat, expelling a series of razor-sharp sunban needles directly into his kneecap. The hockey-laced projectiles caused him no small amount of pain, but it was the knowledge that his daughter had once more gotten the best of him that truly galled the admiral. Just where did the girl keep all these weapons? Looks like I was right, she gloated, though her face had since begun to pale and become slicked with sweat. You're still just as much of an ass as you were 4 years ago. I'm going to kill you for that, you know. Venom oozed from her words. Then do it, Dad. Tenten refused to flinch, a touch of pride traced Sakazuki's features as he prepared to finish her off. As her father, it was the least he could do. You should have known better. He admonished her roughly, molten droplets of magma dripping from his arms. Attacking me was suicide. But you would do that, wouldn't you? I salute you for your courage. Now, Now, go join your mother. In hindsight, perhaps those weren't the wisest of words to say. Who knew what might have been listening? Alas, Akainu was far too focused, determined to eliminate his daughter, to be done with her and move on to more pressing matters. Matters such as Whitebeard, and more importantly, Da-ching! A sword slammed down behind him, its absurdly long edge shattering the stone behind him. In that instant, time ceased to be. Akainu froze, his eyes flying wide open as a low growl resounded in his ears. Every fiber of his being wanted to turn around and face this new foe, but he found himself inexplicably blocked somehow. His body simply wouldn't respond to his commands. This wasn't just intimidation that held him fast, rooting his boots in place. It was downright domination, and he realized his mistake. In lieu of that, perhaps he could be forgiving for breaking character, for whispering. Holy fuck, he's right behind me, isn't he? His daughter nodded sagely. Yup. Ah, Christ. Motherrucker. Gale force winds slashed at the air around him, confining, constricting. He was forced one step backwards and then another, and another still, until there was nothing but ice beneath his feet, to melt that meant certain doom on his part. He turned to regard this new foe, found baleful whites-eyed balefully regarding him in turn. There were no irises to be seen there, just pure, white. He was the wind incarnate. Nature come to judge him and haven't found him wanting. The keening sound of the storm increased tenfold, making his wounds sting ever more, sending his jacket fluttering in every direction. Boss. Tenten practically sobbed her captain's name and title. Naruto said nothing to her, he simply raised an arm toward Sakazuki. Pain. Akainu hissed in surprise as something sliced into his face, the unseen blade of wind sending his cap flying away into the winds. And that was just the opening salvo. He tried in vain to blink away the blood that clouded his eyes, but to no avail, no amount of scrubbing on his part would remove it. He saw only Naruto stalking forward through his scarlet-shrouded vision, sword in hand, its tapered tip dragging menacingly across the deck of ice with an eerie scraping sound. Aghast, the Admiral raised an arm, magma coating the limb into a ghastly claw. Hellhound. Too little, too late. The next, he was knocked back down. And the next thing Akainu knew, for quite some time after that, was pain. Tenten also knew a thing or two about pain. She'd lived alongside it as a child, grown up with it as a constant companion during her cadet years. Her father had been a harsh mentor, but she'd thought him fair. Most of the time, when he wasn't drilling the motto of absolute justice into her very bones. But this was absurd. Fathers didn't try to murder their daughters, no matter the circumstances. That chainmail had saved her life once again. It had been her mother's cherished armor, passed on to her just before her untimely death during a training accident. Recovering it from the warden's quarters had been the best thing she'd ever done. Without it, she'd have a cannibal-sized hole in her stomach as opposed to this, much more painful wound. Itai! She yelped, tightening the bindings still further, ripping the rest of her sleeve into strips. Tenten was no doctor, but like any Marine, she knew the basics of first aid. Always bind the wound. Disinfect if you could, if not, then hope for the best. Ha! Her own papa had just obliterated her appendix and scorched half her insides. Infection was the least of her worries at the moment, the idea of dying proved far more troublesome. She needed medical attention and soon, if she didn't see a proper doctor within the hour. Shit, she coughed, flecks of blood spattering the ice. And I thought Tayuya had a foul mouth, oh gods, hurts to laugh. To think she would die like this, after coming so far. God, this sucked. At least she had managed to stab her old man once for what he'd done to Mom. Are you alright, dear? Tenten stared, momentarily alarmed to find herself staring up at a dark-haired woman. Her face was that of an angel amidst the chaos, those dark eyes warm, caring, emphatic. That alone was enough to worry her. It was damn near impossible to find such a person on a battlefield. The moment she saw the Admiral's jacket she tried to bolt. Gentle hands forced her back to the ground, and with her wound, the brunette was powerless to resist, impotent as those supple fingertips glided over her bloodied hands. "What, who are? My name is NeonZangetsu." The Marine Admiral soothed, her words soft, almost motherly in their tones. "And you needn't worry. Although you may be my enemy, I will not hesitate to treat you. It is my way. Besides, I believe a favor is owed you for what your captain has done. Or rather, is still doing." An eerie look entered those almond-shaped eyes as they swiveled to regard the incredibly one-sided beating Akainu continued to take. "I never did like that man. Forget about me." Ten growled, suppressing a grimace. "The old man over there, Whitebeard, his injuries." You mean the one I just finished treating? He's already up and about. I warned him not to overdo it, but he should be fine so long as he doesn't overtax himself." As if to mock those very words, a heart-wrenching explosion ripped through Marineford seconds later, the power of the Gura Gura no Mi manifesting itself in full force once more. "I'm surprised he could endure such wounds, even with my treatments." But how was that possible? Akainu had burned out his insides. How the hell was that old man still moving? More importantly, how had Unohana healed him? Retsu's smile grew, ever so slightly. "I'm very good at what I do, dear. Now let me see your wound, oh my. Your father did this to you? How the hell do you know about that?" That's another story for another time." Soft fingers glided over her bandages. "Now, I'm going to have to ask you to stay still. This may hurt a bit." Gulping, Ten returned her attention to the fray raging around them. She had done all she could, the rest of this battle was up to her nakama. In this battle, death was a very real possibility. And she doubted any of them would be lucky enough to happen upon a benevolent marine medic as she had. "Don't die, guys." "Arg, I've had it." "Had what?" She cooed. "Enough of you." Don Flamingo snarled, his temper utterly lost as Mei Terumi danced away from him, her lithe form proving impossible to catch. His strings closed around her for an instant, just long enough for her to dart in and plant a teasing peck on his cheek. Of course, her lips scalded, infuriating him to no small degree when she slipped away once more. He'd since lost his sunglasses to their battle, his thin veneer of composure having evaporated long ago, much to his great displeasure. Under normal circumstances, he might have bested her, but he was out of his element here, unable to secure even the most glancing of blows without exposing himself to her dead mist, that dread fog that threatened to slough the very flesh from his bones. It didn't matter how many hostages or pawns he used, be they pirate or marine, his fellow fruit user cut them down indiscriminately. In Dressrosa, her heartlessness might have been admirable. Now it was just infuriating him, inflaming his already black temper to a feverish degree. A sudden explosion rocked the earth near them, causing her attention to slip, ever so slightly. Don Flamingo seized the moment and pounced, snaring her within his strings. Mei promptly turned and spat at him, but even the burning sensation of her acid couldn't deny him now. Victory was his. "A little fight in ya, eh?" The Don sneered, pulling her closer, snickering as thin cuts began to appear across her bare shoulders. "I like that. Then you're gonna love me." A hand closed around his shoulder, spinning him right round to face them. Their visage struck a chord somewhere deep within him. This kid, why the hell did he look like Itachi? Tsukiyomi. The last thing the Shichibukai saw were those hellish eyes looming before him. That was his first and last mistake. Pain flared behind his gaze, hellish images flaring before his mind in rapid succession, mental torture of the highest degree and caliber so painful he never even felt the blade slide between his ribs to pierce his liver. Perhaps that was cruel of the young Uchiha. Perhaps not. Whatever the case, Don Flamingo would not die a quick death that day, assuming he died at all. His body crumpled like a sack of bloody potatoes, sinking to the ground amidst an ever-growing pool of blood. Live or die, his part in the battle was done. You alright? Era, Sasuke-kun.
Mei purred, surprised, yet grateful for his timely intervention.
I appreciate the assistance, but what happened to Akiji? About that. Halt, fiend. Sasuke blanched, a rare look of discomfort overcoming him as his head snapped in the opposite direction. Mei craned her neck towards the voice, her teal eyes widening ever so slightly as a pair of figures distinguished themselves in the gloom, standing proudly amidst the fog of war raging back and forth around them. What she saw there elicited an arched eyebrow. Bushy brows, dark hair, matching outfits. These fellows, why did they feel the need to wearing green jumpsuits beneath their marine uniforms, and why oh why did those uniforms have to be skin tight? Friends of yours? She asked mildly, lips twisting in the slightest of smiles. Hell no. The Uchiha retorted with virulence. I've been trying to get away from them for the last 5 minutes. They won't leave me alone. By the power of youth, I will defeat you, Uchiha Sasuke. The younger of the pair declared, stepping forward. Now turn yourself over and surrender. That's the way, Lee. The older of the two encouraged. Show him power of your youth. Yash, Gai-sensei. It took everything Mei had not to melt their bones right then and there. All this blathering of you and whatnot, it was enough to strain even her legendary patience. And that was saying something. Surely you're joking. They're stronger than they look, Sasuke muttered, raising his blade. I tried, but between them and Kuzan I had to send Shikamaru ahead with Luffy, or risk being overwhelmed. Do you think he'll be alright? Sasuke frowned. Shikamaru, or Luffy? Mei chuckled. Both. Do not think you can ignore us, pirates. Rock Lee shouted loudly, garnering their attention once more. If you will not surrender, then you leave me. Sasuke's visage turned fearsome. Oh? You saw what we just did to that Shichibukai over there. Do you really want a piece of us? I admit you're a bit of a problem for me alone, but 2 on 2? Impossibly, those eyes seemed to darken, warping from scary to downright murderous. We'll kill you in less than a minute. Lee actually faltered for a moment, his courage threatening to evaporate in the face of their combined front. Alas, it simply did not last. You do not frighten me, Uchiha. Good, Lee, good. Don't let them unnerve you. I've learned from the best, sensei. Lee. Gai-sensei. Lee. Gai-sensei. Abruptly the duo embraced with teary gusto, somehow evoking an image of a setting sun amidst the chaos. Both pirates simultaneously sweat-dropped. Oi, 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 oi. Sasuke sighed. I hope Hashirama's having better luck than we are. Nyarg, what do you think you're doing? Just following orders, is all. Gecko Moria gasped desperately for breath as he found his neck twisted at an excruciating angle, the bones threatening to pop and snap at the slightest provocation. The rest of him was in no better shape, his bulky body entrapped by all wooden blocks from the waist down, the earthsome shackles holding him firmly in place whilst his would-be killer prepared to take his life from this world and usher it into the next. Ironically, his tormentor seemed genuinely regretful in his actions, nay, he seemed inclined to apologize for his misdeeds even as he prepared to administer the killing blow. What the hell was going on here? He tried to take the man's shadow, only to find himself like this. It had all happened so swiftly he was still struggling to make sense of it. Now, Moria relied heavily upon his shadow fruit to do the bulk of the fighting, but the man had even done something to secure his doppelganger, pinning it to the ground with these strange wooden stakes of his. Without the power of his fruit to aid him, Moria was as helpless as a child, and it showed in the way he struggled. I'm sorry, youngin', but orders are orders. The last Senju replied. The moment you decided to attack me, your fate was sealed. I must admit, even that admiral was more of a challenge than you. No wait, don't. And the neck goes snap. Moria's neck proved surprisingly fragile, it snapped like a brittle twig. His body held out for but an instant, the whites of his eyes showing red as his bloated heart struggled to receive signal from a brain that no longer held any function. Hashi released him, allowing the man's long neck to collapse with the rest of him. What were the others doing, he wondered? Naruto's wind could clearly be heard wailing somewhere beyond the yard, but he'd no idea where Sasuke and the others had gone. As if on cue, a spiky head of hair caught his eye. Ah! There's Shikamaru. A pause. Why is he running away? Run for your life. Luffy couldn't help but share Shikamaru's opinion. Despite everything they'd gone through to make it this far, through hell and high water, Akiji was still chasing them. Kizaru and Akainu remained occupied, but even one admiral was one too many for his liking. To make matters worse, his companion had no way of slowing him down. They'd only been able to evade him thus far by plowing through hordes of marines, knowing Kuzan would never risk harming his subordinates merely to capture a pair of pirates. Shit. Unfortunately, that strategy entailed escaping said marines, an effort that exacted a most painful not to mention hilarious toll on the two men. Luffy could at least rely upon his Gomu Gomu abilities for protection. All Shikamaru had to his name were a pair of energy knuckles knives and his own superior intellect. Needless to say, he was running out of ideas. They'd barely escaped Smoker with Hancock's assistance. There would be no such hockey-powered kicks to wrest them out of trouble this time. Which way? Luffy demanded. Left or right? Right. Go to the right. Together they cut past another clash of pirates and marines, skirting the conflict, only to feel the temperature plummet perilously. That was the only warning they had before all hell broke loose, a wave of Arctic winds rushing down to slice them to pieces. Akiji made his appearance seconds later, swinging down at them with all his considerable might. Ice Saber. Kaya Not that way The ex-marine shouted as they scrambled around the frigid blade. Just being close to it was enough to chill their skin. Then which way? I don't know, alright? I've never been here before. But I thought you were a marine? What good are you then if you can't show me where to go? That hurt, you jerk. But the younger pirate was right, they couldn't dodge Akiji forever, not in a battlefield like this. Still, he wasn't a fighter. Not even remotely adept at close combat. He specialized in long-distance tactics, using the terrain and superior forces to overwhelm his opponents. Having nothing but haki and a knife was disheartening to say the least. But no. He had to try. Make a stand here. If he continued to run away while his nakama fought and died around him, what kind of man did that make him? Luffy's head snapped around as the marine strategist ground to a halt beside him, sandals biting deep troughs into the ice. His face was set in iron, his hard black eyes glaring unflinchingly back the way they had come, back ramrod straight as he stood in the face of the encroaching enemy. Pineapple-asan? I told you to stop calling me that. Shikamaru growled, unnotching his knives. Now go on ahead. Raising a hand to his mouth, he bit deep, desperately trying to overcome the fear with pain. It worked, albeit barely, the flinty taste of blood serving to momentarily clear his mind. I'll cover you. But. Goddammit Straw Hat, I said go. Luffy dithered only a moment longer, his fear for Ace winning out against his fear for the older man. I'm counting on you. Shikamaru watched him go with a wince, suddenly terribly aware of the trembling in his hands. Stupid. This was so stupid. Why did he suddenly feel the need to stand his ground? But even as he started to reconsider the consequences of his actions. The icy admiral arched a frigid brow. You're not running anymore? THTH, that's right, asshole. The navigator willed his knees not to knock together. Bring it on. I don't have to beat this guy. I just need to slow him down. You have no idea who you're messing with. Well, you've got guts, I'll give you that. Kuzan replied. But I know a distraction when I see one. I think I'll just get rid of you and go on after Straw Hat. Crap. Ice. Doria. There came a sharp flash of bitter steel, the icy edge intercepted, then shattered altogether by a jagged weapon of angry iron. Shikamaru gulped, willing himself to follow up, to look into the eyes of his savior. Attached to said steel was a hilt, and to that hilton armed the owner of said arm, none other than one Zaraki Kenpachi in all his grinning glory. He looked like absolute shit, grisly cuts adjourning the length of his body, the top half of Haori and Hakama having been lost to battle, exposing his scar-ridden chest. All in all, it was an utterly terrifying sight. Yo, Shikamaru. The man grunted. Looks like you found somebody strong. Mind if I cut in? I'm saved. Be my guest. Shit, this time it's an admiral, too. Kenpachi laughed, it was a deep, throaty sound. Lucky me. Hopefully you're good for more than a warm-up, Ice Boy. A cloud of cold steam pushed past Akiji's mouth, his lips furrowing into a thin line as he considered this new foe. Ararara, now I recognize you. You're that guy who butched all those people in Inae's lobby. Kenpachi Zaraki, was it? What happened to Hawkeye? I thought he had you preoccupied. Was that me? Zaraki returned with a grin. Can't remember. But as for my Hawk, I let him go for old time's sake. Brat wasn't up to par after all these years. Shikamaru almost gulped at that. The man was cut up all over and he didn't even consider that a warm-up? This guy wasn't just crazy, he was batshit insane. Unshouldering his ragged blade, the master swordsman leveled the weapon at the icy demon, eyes abrim with batlust, like a full cup about to overflow. Ain't got no reason to do that with you. Now, you gonna play with that little shit, or are you gonna fight a real opponent? Wait just a moment. Both men turned as another figure resolved itself through the battle, his red-armored figures distinctly striding towards them. His body caked in blood, none of it his own, the yellow, slanted eyes of the sage regarding his two comrades and the admiral with a frightening disparity. Despite himself, Shikamaru gasped. Hashirama? Stay away, Shikamaru. There's shipwright warned. I don't want you to be caught up in this. What do you want, Senju? The larger man growled, visible eye narrow as he regarded his nakama. This is my prey. I beg to differ. Came the quiet reply. I have a score to settle with him. Goddammit, you already got one admiral. This one's mine. Care to elaborate on that? Akiji frowned. These men weren't bluffing, Kenpachi had spoken with complete confidence of an admiral's defeat. The only question was, whom? Losing even one of their number would be catastrophic, too, disastrous, and he didn't even want to think of what might happen should Akainu bite the dust. And then there were the Shichibukai, the wraiths seemed to be targeting them as well. Almost as if Naruto wanted nothing more than to slay the most powerful man and woman. Era, you mean Kizaru-san? Hashirama smiled then, not his usually friendly grin, but a ghastly grimace so chilling it made Akiji himself shudder in revulsion. I left him in the esteemed care of the Whitebeard pirates, back in the plaza. You can rest assured he won't be causing any more trouble. And now I get this one. Kenpachi bit out, waving his blade dangerously close to the sage's head. Ain't no way in hell I'm letting you have two in one day. Shall we take him together, then? Not if I kill him first. Oi, you don't mean. Hashirama's left eye twitched in the beginnings of another smile. That's right. Our true objective is none other than. Time got funny when you were near death. Take one Portgas D. Ace for example. The man was certain he would have died multiple times if it were not for the timely intervention of the wraiths and Whitebeard. Who knew what pitched battles were raging down below, what foes fought unseen? A knot of worry twisted in his gut at the thought, the battle must be going badly if even Sengoku himself had gone down to fight. He could hear the wind shrieking and keening down below, wailing in relief or distress, he knew not. Akainu was probably dead or at least in dire straits, he must have been, else the fleet admiral wouldn't have gone down there in a panic only moments before. Whomever stood there, whomever wielded the powers of the Kaze no Mi, they were going absolutely berserk in the courtyard. Now, with only Grandpa Garp left guarding him, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to be a hero. Demonic Sonata / 10 sword style. Ah! The firebrand blinked as his grandfather's battered body sailed up to join him on the execution stand, his broken hands still twitching towards his groin in a vain attempt to cover the damage that had been wrought too close to his family jewels. That was what happened when you were blasted by a sound wave at point-blank range and kicked in the balls. Seconds later his savior reappeared, dress fluttering in the wind as she alighted a mere millimeter before him. Well, a dulcet voice crooned. That takes care of him. Ace might have been in mortal peril, prepared to die at any moment, but he simply couldn't get over just how goddamn beautiful this woman was. Flowing scarlet hair mirrored a crimson dress, offset by all cream-colored skin, a heart-shaped face and dark eyes. She was the most stunning creature he'd ever seen, gorgeous in her intensity, terrible in her beauty. And then she opened her mouth. Stop staring, fuckface. Ace's jaw promptly dropped to the ground. What? Sup? She raised a hand in greeting. My boss sends his regards. We're here to bust you out. We? He finally became aware of the dark-skinned man standing behind her, his bulky form marred with Bloodgarp's blood-black sunglasses, regarding him intently. Who are? We. The name's Killer Bee. Now it's time to set you free. Yeah, ignore him. He's an idiot. Tayuya said nothing more, quietly kneeling behind him. The click of a key opening the lock was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The last son of Golda Roger felt strength flood his veins, angry embers licking a trail of fire down his flesh as his power came flooding back to him. Grimacing he stood, forcing himself to stand on sleeping legs, his lower body numb from kneeling for so many hours. Power roared through him and he welcomed it with relief. It seemed today wasn't his day to die after all. Thanks, he muttered, rubbing at a raw wrist. Oi, where is your captain, anyway? The redhead turned her gaze aside, her mouth set in a slight grimace. Was that fear or consternation that tightened her brow? Who knew? He's preoccupied. Akainu reeled from yet another impossibly strong blow, his world spinning as another wrenched against these ribs. He'd lost count. His opponent was an unstoppable force of nature, it seemed, and defeat was growing near. To think, he'd been holding back this entire time. But no longer, he realized, as another blow dropped him into the ice, only for a second to launch him into the skies moments later. A third sent his body caroming off the tundra, once again mercifully putting his body out of range from the deadly and almost unseen strikes. Daishinkan. Great Dragon Shock. Or so he thought. The Marine Admiral narrowly rolled to the side, his body chilled as Naruto's sea-colored blade slammed into the ice, obliterating another swath of land with his blade. That deadly slash didn't stop there, however, it kept right on going, carving yet another swath of destruction into Marineford. Men and women alike were tossed about like mere ragdolls, unable to do anything but scream helplessly as their beloved base continued to fall apart around their very ears. A squad of those very soldiers rushed to assist him, desperately calling out for him to rise up and fight back. Sakazuki-san. Utterly unaware of the danger standing mere meters away. Akainu tried to open his mouth to call out to them to warn them away, but to no avail, the words wouldn't come. Out of the way, small fry. Naruto growled as he swung the blade forward. Yokuzen. Cursed flame slash. A swirl of ghastly green fire burst from the blade's tip, engulfing the soldiers before they could reach him, sending them shrieking to the ground. His sword seemed to sing as they burned, devouring their charred husks, growing stronger with each passing instant. Naruto ignored them and their deaths, reaching down to take hold of Sakazuki's collar. The Admiral's attempts to burn him were met with empty atmosphere. One simply did not burn the air. The pirate only drew him closer, his fingers digging fiercely into the lapels of the man's jacket. "She was your daughter," he snarled, his words like knives in the man's ears. "How could you do that to her?" Akainu spat a bloody gob at him. "You have no right to question what a father does to his child." "I have every right." Clenched knuckles barreled into his visage, bending bone and crushing cartilage as if they were tissue paper. Blood trickled into Akainu's mouth courtesy of his now newly broken nose, entire universes detonating before his vision in a series of white-hot supernovas. Unbearable, blinding agony. He barely felt the ground when Naruto tossed him down, scarcely recognized north from south. Trying to decipher either proved nigh impossible for his faded vision at the moment, he could only barely see his tormentor in pursuit. "You shouldn't have touched her," Naruto growled, advancing upon him. "Shouldn't have touched my Gramps, either. They're precious to me. Both of them. Part of my pride. And my pride is a hurricane." Black wind leapt up to snare the Admiral's broken body, ripping him from the ground and battering into his body from every angle. This was not pain. It was more than that. This was torture. His every wound cried out for solace and was given none as the gale drove after an eternity trapped in that vortex. He was finally released, flung to the ground like a broken toy. Agony arched his spine, leaving him vulnerable to any attack that had been forthcoming, prepared in light of this situation. If Uzumaki were to attack him now, he'd be helpless. A heartbeat later this thought proved prophetic. Naruto's blade pierced the point of his shoulder, his tone modulating to a darkened glee over the man's screams. "How do you like my 7-star sword?" His words trailed after him, dousing him with further mockeries. "It wasn't exactly easy to reforge this thing when I found it, you know. They say it causes madness in whomever wields it, but it's actually funny. I'm feeling quite sane right now. I suppose its curse doesn't affect those who've already delved through the depths of insanity and emerged untouched. It seems to want you dead just as much as I do, though. Let's remedy that, shall we?" He took the blade from the wound and cut down again. Once more, Akainu screamed. Yes, he had beaten back Whitebeard for the moment and defeated his daughter, for all the good it had done. Naruto was dominating him, proving the superiority of his element in every way. And that damned sword of his. It radiated an aura of pure menace, malice incarnate. Shikisaiken. The sword wanted his blood, and if this continued, it would have it. "Nothing can protect you from me," it hissed as it cut into his flesh, cutting the air itself in twine whilst it sought his blood. Not weapons, not men, not armor. Inugami Gorin. Naruto's blade snapped up and a block removed from Akainu's flesh, and he scrambled away like a drunken spider, putting some distance between himself and this impossible fighter. "You." He glared at Naruto's defiant figure, almost unable to believe what the hell he'd been put through because of this one simple action, because of this mere man. This filth. This pirate. I will not stand for this. Droplets of magma coursed across his flesh, boiling at the ice beneath their feet as his voice thundered out. "I will not stand for it. Too bad." Naruto's voice snaked into his ear. When had he gotten behind him? Causing the Admiral to start in surprise. "You don't get a say, not anymore. Yokuzen." It was a rare thing for Sakazuki to experience the pain of being burned, but this blade did just that, its emerald flames crashing through the protection afforded by his magma to sear his dark sin. Angry red welds broke out on his skin when the inferno roiled over him, blisters boiling upon his face as he baked in the firestorm. Naruto slashed down again and the burning hell ended, hurtling his scorched shell to the ground once more. A terrifying moment of silence passed between them, the Admiral realizing he might very well die should this torment continue. That was when he saw it, there, just in the corner of his peripherals. A familiar figure, creeping around the edges of the battle. Could it be? Was he hallucinating? Was that really Bakram? Akainu's face kissed the soil and the spell was broken. It bruised, striking the terrain with enough force to make him bounce. Before he could recover, Naruto was there, opening a deep trench in his back with his blade uncaring as the Shikaseiken sung its song of battle and bloodlust. Yes, Naruto grinned, he deserves this. Boss. Taiyuya's voice split the air between them, jerking him out of the depths. We've got him. What the hell's going on here? Taiyuya? Naruto turned aside, sanity returning to his features as he beheld the burning pirate beside her. Good, looks like you did your job. And you've got ace. Now, you're both just in time for the finale. Now. Akainu lashed out with the last of his strength, magma erupting from his every pore, sight set upon the last of Roger's legacy. His fire would be no match for his magma. He'd burn right through the boy before he ever knew what had happened. But nothing happened. Instead, he stared, gawped as found his advance inexplicably halted, stalled against the unbreakable edge of Naruto's blade. Something was wrong. Why couldn't he feel his everything? His arms? His legs? He couldn't even move a muscle. It was only as he looked down, saw the smooth steel sticking into his chest, that he realized what had happened. The edge had pierced through that cloak of lava he wore, penetrating his intangibility to strike at the one thing no human thought he had. His heart. He was dead. And if not, soon would be. You stubborn son of a bitch. Naruto gave the blade an angry wrench, causing Sakazuki to shudder. 10-10 wasn't enough, you had to go after him, too? Can't you just roll over and die? Sengoku pounced in that instant, massive fist swinging down at the blonde's head. With Akainu dead or dying, and the blonde's sword still trapped in his body, this might be the only opportunity he had. Heiken. / Nukekes. A wall of fire and wind greeted his surprise attack, an inferno superheated by the strength of the hurricane behind it. But Sengoku hadn't become Fleet Admiral for nothing. Still, he plummeted towards the blonde, driving his massive golden downward with all his willpower and might. Never made it. No, you don't, fucker. Taiyuya shrieked in obscenity and exhaled in a massive burst of sound, both blinding and deafening him in a single instant. Stricken by the sudden loss of sight and sound, he faltered, losing control of his descent. That momentary lapse was all he needed, Naruto did, to end him. Fist met fist and the latter yielded, his now matte black arm crushing Sengoku's in a single swing. Hardening. Naruto muttered, his right arm turning black with the power of haki, becoming impervious to even the most brutal of blades. Instead of losing a limb to his opponent, he simply stood there, cold white eyes boring into the Fleet Admiral. His surprise attack having failed completely, the man struggled to escape, but the hurricane held him fast. Despite his Buddha form, he simply couldn't tear himself away from the blonde. A silence passed between the two men, infinite in its meaning. And then it was over. Naruto struck upward. His fist found purchase in the massive man's gut, shattering the control over his fruit. Sengoku toppled forward with a gasp, his form shrinking, golden sheen fading, as his body returned to its true form. With his free hand, Naruto quietly tugged the 7-star sword from Akainu's chest, the green blade still glimmering with the dying man's blood. Sengoku had no doubt of what would happen next, yet in all his might, he simply couldn't find a way to fight free. His free hand smashed relentlessly against the boy's face, but he'd hardened that too, and merely received a broken knuckle for his efforts. Naruto didn't even so much as flinch, his lips parting for a slight sigh. Taiyuya? He spoke softly, his gaze falling to the small form still perched on her back. Yachiru? Yeah. Don't look. Naruto didn't even bother to speak to Sengoku, he simply raised the Shikaseiken and cut down. Hard. Sengoku barely even felt it when the blade split him in twine, its alabaster edge cleaving through his right shoulder to emerge effortlessly through his left, completely bifurcating him. Damn. That was his last thought before his two separate halves split and toppled apart. He was dying before he even hit the ground. His lifeless gaze a silent plea unto the sky, begging for mercy as that cold steel descended upon his neck. Naruto gave none. Sengoku's head rolled away from his shoulders. And the last hope of the Marines died with it. /N, and there you be. Despite my illness, I was so moved by your many reviews that I worked really hard to get this up. I've racked up quite the body count thus far. Sengoku Akainu and of course Moria are dead, Kizaru and Don Flamingo are questionable, and Tenten survived. But we're not done just yet. What happened to Whitebeard? Will he survive? To those of you who were expecting Unohana to appear, you were correct. I do believe the Wraiths have finally found their doctor. The battles picked up big TME in this chapter, as we see the Wraiths are quite capable of holding their own. Naruto. It should be mentioned in any case that absolute chaos is about to ensue, what with Naruto telling his crew to go all out and wreak havoc. He'll finally get to chat with his Gramps as of next chapter, and their body count will nothing short of enormous. Look forward to it, y'all. So, in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly? And of course, enjoy the preview. Next chapter. Mastermind. Preview. Mohohuhu, the masked man chuckled, a hand lingering over the orange facade that covered his visage. Thank you for all that you've done, Naruto-kun. Truly. I honestly didn't expect you to form such an alliance of rogues when I broke you out, let alone weaken the Marines this much. Congratulations on your victory. Such a shame that so many had to die to see this day won. Naruto bristled. How dare he speak of that? Oi oi, a strong hand clasped his shoulder, Shanks' palm the only thing restraining him from lashing out. His uncle surprise had arrived here and the end of the battle at the loss of so many, to effectively bring the war of the best to a close. The last living link to his mother excluding Whitebeard standing here beside him. Don't let him get to you, kid. My thanks to you as well, Red Hair. The stranger laughed loudly, the lone eye of his mask turning to regard the emperor. It is only fitting that you of all people, be here to witness this. The day the world government was brought low, down to its knees. The day I abolished it and gave rise to a new world. K.E.H. Zaraki snorted. What the hell is he blabbering about? Retsu frowned as well, her mouth downturned in silent approval. Ararara, Akiji's weak gasp merely confirmed his disagreement. Whoever you are, that won't work. I'm still here. Marines and pirates alike glanced about, wondering just who this masked madman was. Who he claimed to be. It will be the dawn of a new era. His voice rang out loudly across the yard, speaking to all assembled. A new organization, one truly dedicated to world peace. To prosperity. A world where no one will suffer. Where there are no losers, only the winners. Long have I strived from shadows to reach this goal, and now you, each and every one of you, shall see it come to fruition. The name of this organization, you ask? Why, it is none other than Akatsuki. New era? Naruto finally found his voice, eyes flashing a dangerous red. World peace? You know what I think of that, as a pirate? Do tell. To hell with that bullshit. Chapter 10, Mastermind. Naruto didn't know how to feel. On one hand, he had just slain two of the most powerful men the Marines had to offer, mere minutes apart. His blade was still bathed in their blood, greedily gobbling up their strength and adding it to his own. And yet he knew Sengoku's death hadn't just come at his hands. Were it not for Ace and Taiyuya, he might have had the opening at all, might still be fighting and losing against one of the greatest Marines he'd ever known. He had killed the world's mightiest Marine through luck, and luck alone. Teamwork was what had felled the fleet admiral, he'd merely administered the killing blow. The thought was unpleasant. Shit. Taiyuya was suddenly at his elbow, gawping down at the man's headless torso. You really fucking did it, didn't ya? "Ya chopped the hell out of that guy." Naruto stared down at his soaked sword, the 7 stars of its surface still gleaming brightly. "I guess so." Grunting, he reached down for the admiral's head, hefting it as though it were but a bauble and tying it into his belt. There. The death of their commander-in-chief should be enough to convince the Marines of their plight. Brutal, but effective. Atop Tayuya, Yuichiro averted her eyes, grimacing at the sight. Naruto chose very carefully to ignore her, instead turning to Akainu, the last of his troubles still bleeding out only yards away. Impossibly the red dog was still alive, though not for much longer. Unlike a certain someone. Even now, he could feel the light that was Ten in his mind, registering as a flickering flame within his haki. She too, was alive. The difference being she would live to see another day. Relief flooded him like a wave, a surge of incredible joy momentarily blotting out his anger. Stills, he was almost grateful for her absence now, though the gunner loathed her old man. Naruto was certain she wouldn't want to see what he was about to do next. But it had to be done. He'd tell her the truth of it all later. Akainu still lay on his back, covered in his own blood, but he turned a dark iris to regard the wraith when he approached. "Here to finish me off?" His words were little more than a whisper. Naruto nodded. "In case you're wondering, it's over." He began, nudging the dying man in the side with his boot, rolling him over so that his final sight might be of the sky. "Sengoku is dead and the battle is lost. Your daughter survived though, someone must have found her and applied first aid. She'll live. Thought you should know." A thoughtful expression wiped away the admiral's angry scowl at that. His pale face seemed to consider those words, his eyes growing foggy and distant. Perhaps he was thinking of happier times when the two of them were nothing more than a family, when there was no rank or title to separate them. Perhaps not. Naruto liked to think that he was. Then they cleared for the final time, peering up into the endlessly blue skies overhead with a long so intense it was almost painful to look at. "I see." There was a silence afterward, and for a moment, Naruto actually thought the admiral had passed on before he spoke again. "I suppose that's good, then. I lived my life, doing what I thought was right, in any case." His remaining eye swiveled to lock upon the blonde. "The world government will hunt you to the ends of the earth for this, you know." He didn't sound angry, just certain. "You will never know a moment's peace so long as you sail these seas. Your every waking instant will be spent looking over your shoulder. The world itself will want you dead. Even a crushing defeat like this will not be enough to deter them for long. My death will only strengthen their cause." For a split second, Naruto hesitated. Akainu wasn't necessarily a bad man per se, if those last words were any indication. He genuinely believed the world government to be in the right. Wrong or not, one's perception simply didn't change overnight. The world would want blood for what had been done today, and that blood would most likely be his. They can send whomever they want, it won't matter. They'll just be sending lambs to the slaughter. "So, you say?" "I have to finish you off now." Naruto found the words tasted like ash in his throat. "Can't risk you coming back to kill us." "Very well." Sakazuki's sight drifted shut in resignation. He'd spoken his piece and was satisfied. "But before you take my head, will you grant me one last request?" Naruto strongly considered telling Akainu to just fuck off, but something in the man's tone stopped him. "Fine." He grunted. "Name it." "Take care of my daughter." Nodding, the blonde cut down with his blade. Stop/ace. Naruto froze, his blade halting a mere millimeter from splitting Sakazuki's neck in twine. The sudden inaction sent shockwaves rippling across the ice and cleared away the smoke, broadcasting their position to virtually every marine within a mile radius. The clearing of the fog also allowed him to see just whom it was that had called out to him. Monkey D. Luffy was hurtling towards them like a bullet loosed from a gun, swift strides all but devouring the distance between them. And there, still approaching, but a good deal slower thanks to her recently bandaged wound. Tenten? Luffy?
Both men openly guffawed, relieved to see their loved ones in one piece and only slightly worse for wear. Naruto was the first to move, dimly registering Mugiwara's many profuse arigato as he pushed past, letting the brothers have their little celebration.
You look like shit. He chuckled. I feel like shit. She groaned. Give me a hand here. I want to talk to my pops before.
Naruto faltered, his smile vanishing. The remainder of the Marines were keeping their distance for now, but once they realized what was going on.
Yeah. I gotcha.
She limped forward with an awkward gait partially favoring her right side until he finally moved to aid her. She collapsed against him with a gasp, nearly crippled by the action. Even then the brunette didn't so much as glance at Sengoku's headless body nor the baffled form of Port Gasti, Ace embracing his younger brother. She'd only eyes for Akainu.
Please, Red Mistress, kill me.
The disgraced admiral muttered to Tayuya, eyes still closed.
Before it's too late. The redhead blinked, confused. Why the hell would I do that?
I don't want to be seen in such a disgraceful state. A lightbulb flashed in the pirate's mind. He'd rather die and be thought a villain than be faced with his daughter a second time.
Nope. What? I said no.
As Tayuya looked on, Tenten half-walked, half-limped towards her old man under the blonde's guidance, pausing only to glance at her but once before moving on. Akainu's eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him, but he didn't attack. The old man's gaze remained fixated on the hole he'd punched through his only child, the scarlet stains still seeping through the bandages. They remained that way for a few moments, father and daughter, both staring, one living, the other dying, yet neither willing to speak. Finally, the latter broke it with a tearful sob.
Goddammit, Dad, why the hell did you do that to me? Sorry. I almost died. And then you tried to finish me off. Now look at you. You're the one dying because of what you did. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I am.
The dying Marine rasped.
Sorry. Is that all you can say? I'm sorry. Sakazuki's visage nodded with invisible strain, the words taking a visible toll from him. Anyone could see he hadn't long left. With a wound like that, it was a miracle he was alive at all.
Tenten reached down for him and pulled his bloodied head into her lap and cradled it there, her fingers stroking at his scarred scalp. Naruto didn't know what to say to this reunion. He felt like a third wheel, standing here, seeing something he'd rather not see. It was like nothing he'd suspected. Now, he almost felt bad for ending the man's life. Had he let his anger get the better of him, his wrath at Tenten's injury overriding his better judgment? A glance at Luffy and Ace said no. No, it hadn't been his original objective, but seeing the two brothers reunited made him feel good inside. On the other hand, he'd just taken a girl's father from her, no matter what their relationship might have been. Sighing, he began to walk away, lest he be caught unawares.
I need to get out of here for a little while.
A few yards away stood a dark-haired woman, her pristine white coat and tightly braided hair standing in eerie contrast to the chaos raging around them. The fact that she was an admiral didn't even register within his mind until she came closer, until she spoke, then it was clear as day.
Uzumaki Naruto, I presume?
Her voice was soft and mellifluous, the voice of a healer.
Yes?
He took a moment to eye her up and down, ready to defend himself if need be.
Strange. His intel had suggested there were only 3 admirals in the Navy. Not 4. Someone higher up in the chain, then?
Those clever bastards, adding another one while he was locked up.
Regardless, that didn't change the fact that she was an enemy. My name is Unohana Retsu. The admiral introduced herself.
It was I who treated your companion.
Guess I owe you my thanks, then.
It is I who should be thanking you. Her smile was just a touch too sad for his liking, glancing away all too quickly. My dislike for Akainu was well known, but you may have redeemed him at the end. Naruto followed her gaze back to the prone form of the admiral, his chest no longer rising and falling with breath.
He's gone.
Tenten scrubbed at an eye with the back of her hand.
Thanks for waiting. You can do it now. Are you sure? Just get it over with.
Their sniper groaned.
It's necessary to make them submit, right? Just.
She shook herself with an effort.
Just make it quick.
And Naruto did, his blade cutting deep through Akainu's neck, his head bagged a second later.
Damn. Ace whistled from behind them. I'm no fan of the Marines either, but did you have to carve up his corpse? His gaze strayed nervously to the twin heads now belted to Naruto's waist, and the blonde resisted an urge to rebuke him. The boy was young, he didn't know what had to be done. Tenten and the others understood. Someday, he would as well. Fuck you. Tayuya spat back. We bust you out, and now you decided to pussy out on us? Easy, Tayuya. Naruto soothed. It's what he would have wanted. Came the terse reply toward Ace. Besides, this is the man who tried to kill you. If I hadn't blocked him, you wouldn't be standing here right now. You should be glad he's dead. His gaze slipped to Mujiwara. You too, Straw Hat. I think it's high time you and Ace get the hell out of here. You won't like what happens next. I guess. You filth. It all happened so fast.
One moment Ace had been standing there with Naruto and Tayuya, looking down at Sengoku's corpse. The next he was flung aside and to safety, a sword thrusting itself through the back of Naruto's chest instead of his own, emerging in a shower of gore. Tayuya shrieked in surprise, completely unprepared for the sudden ambush, Yuichiro's cry of dismay echoing hers. His feet staggered forward, dragging against the pavements, a look of shock marring his visage.
Naruto. The blonde barely even registered the blade itself. It was the searing agony in his chest that occupied everything else.
He was no stranger to pain, nay, he'd learned to live with it while his mother trained him. But this was different. There could be no ignoring the fire that filled his every pore, the sudden lack of oxygen in his lungs. Despite that, he somehow still found the strength to stretch his neck, to look into the eyes of the man who had slain him.
Boss! Tenten cried. Don't! Retsu was suddenly there, restraining her. If you open your wound again, there'll be nothing more I can do for you. The wraith hissed angrily, eyes boring into his enemy. You! Vice Admiral Momonga glared back at him, bitter black eyes boring balefully into his blue.
Naruto tried to open his mouth and reply, all that emerged was blood. The man gave the blade an angry wrench, ripping it from the blonde's chest, sending his victim stumbling forward. A mistake, and a green one at that, made by a man consumed in the throes of anger and passion. One that cost him most dear. With the pirate no longer trapped on that Nodachi, with his body now prone upon the ground, his allies were free to wreak havoc upon the killer of their comrade.
As they saw fit. And they did. Gomu Gomu no. Jet bazooka. Air rushed out of the man's lungs in one tremendous oof. Of pressure, Luffy's high-speed blow merely the first of many. Heiken. Sonata. A wall of unholy orange fire and sound slammed into Momonga's unprotected flank, bowling the marine over and badly burning him, smoldering his coat from his shoulders. Ace advanced after him not a seconds later, Tayuya hot on his heels. Even Yuichiro, still clinging tight to her shoulder, had a look of wrath in her bright pearly eyes. In that instant the Vice Admiral knew death had come for him, but it had been worth it to avenge the death of his admiral. Drawing himself up, he prepared for the worst, steeling his soul for the void. Wait! 4 pairs of eyes, 1 marine and 3 pirates snapped towards the blonde's body. Because it was moving. No longer twitching in the throes of death, but rising, dragging himself upright, jerking like a puppet severed from its master's strings. That fucking hurt.
Naruto shuffled to his feet like a man starved for food, standing woodenly and without care. His wound wept crimson, but impossibly the young man still stood, cold blue eyes burning on the vice-admiral who dealt him the grievous death blow only moments ago. All too slowly he began to speak, a strange and eerie incantation flowing forth from his lips. 7 downward slopes, 7 bloodied hopes, all bound by the same ropes. With each syllable the blood flowing from his chest began to slow, tapering off until it had stopped altogether. I am the vessel of this sword, it is mine to command, now let us dispense with the verbal trope. The marine gaped, clearly unable to believe what he was seeing. Naruto barely believed it himself. He'd almost forgotten what kind of power the Shikiseiken had imbued him with. Without it, he was merely a powerful Logia and a skilled swordsman, each dangerous in their own right, but when combined with the 7-star sword, his abilities were nothing short of godlike. And after having drank the blood of many foes, 2 of them admirals, no less, it was full to brimming with power. Now that power flowed up the absurdly long edge, through the handle, onto his arm, and into his wound. The wraith nearly bent double as his wound stitched itself shut, muscle and sinew winding themselves back together, his perforated lung repairing itself in the blink of an eye. Power like this could make a man go mad. Indeed, it had nearly done so to a young man named Saga several months ago. But madness did nothing to a man who was already mad, and Uzumaki Naruto lay far beyond its grasp. He felt its influence as the weakest of whispers in the back of his mind, a fleeting thought brushed aside with the barest of ease. Oi 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 oi, he growled, straightening to his full, towering height. It's not very nice to sneak up on people, bastard. His final word resounded with his fist, sending the vice-admiral sprawling into unconsciousness in a single blow. Naruto briefly considered killing him but thought better of it. He needed a witness to testify that Akainu and Sengoku were indeed dead. Momonga would suffice. What? Luffy looked to the blood that coated Naruto's blade, then down to where his wound had been. Ah! That's that long sword from before. The one Zoro broke. What are you doing with it? Borrowing it. Naruto replied cheekily. Don't worry, this sword won't make me go crazy like Saga. Yash, it's fine then. Just like that? Ace and the rest of the wraiths face-bombed. Naruto sighed. He stared down at Sengoku's severed head and suddenly felt the urge to laugh, barely stifling it in times. The Shikiseiken wanted him to laugh though, it clearly enjoyed the idea of killing 2 powerful opponents only moments apart. Shaking his head, he denied it a third. That was when he realized something. Oh, Tayuya. Yeah, boss? Where's B? Tayuya sighed. He went to investigate that, remember? Ah, right. Who knew what secrets Marineford housed? Now was the perfect time to unearth them. With all the fighting going on outside, it would be all too easy for someone to infiltrate headquarters and make off with a few secrets. Or items. Who knew? This would likely be their only opportunity to investigate. Even if they were victorious, more Marines would soon be on their way to lock this place down soon. Time to get this over with. With the Den Mushi still broadcasting, the entire world would witness what was about to happen. It would be perfect. Tayuya. 10-10. Yachiru. We're moving out. Meet me at the scaffold. Aye, sir. I'd like it if you accompanied them. Naruto continued, turning his gaze to Retsu. But don't try anything, I get the feeling you're not exactly who you claim to be. Something flashed in the woman's gaze then, a hint of bloodlust flickering in that serene gaze. And then it was gone, as though it had never been. Naruto frowned. What was this unshakable sense of dread he felt? It certainly wasn't Unohana that frightened him, not with 2 admirals in the bag. Somehow, he had the feeling that this wasn't over yet. As though in decimating the Marines, he'd let loose something worse. Naruto didn't give them so much as a backwards glance, he was already gone with the wind. He could only hope that B at least valued discretion. Yo!
Where the hell am I supposed to go?
The Zoan type glanced this way and that, utterly lost within the broken and twisting corridors of Marine headquarters.
An entire wing of the boiling had collapsed thanks to Naruto's Daishinkan at the beginning of their battle, leaving the rest of the building completely unstable. He wasn't afraid of being crushed, rather, he was afraid of failing to complete his mission. Naruto had been adamant one ace was freed, someone needed to investigate headquarters and make off with as much intelligence as they could.
In hindsight, perhaps Killer Bee wasn't suited to that job. He'd never been the scientific type, he'd sooner smash something rather than look at it for more than a few minutes.
Baka Yoru. Kono Yoru. He grumbled to himself as he descended yet another staircase. I should be out there fightin'. Not in here, hidin'. Fool.
Still grumbling, he swatted at a nearby painting, not even pausing once to consider the ramifications of his actions. Imagine his surprise when that painting twisted aside, the wall falling away to reveal a darkened stairway. Thus exposed, the hybrid turned, arching a dark brown behind his glasses, lips quirking in bemusement.
Now this was more like it. Bingo! Bingo!
He swept down the stairs in an instant, not even pausing to open the first door he found.
He just kicked it down.
No match for his strengths, the metal slab fell away with 2 blows, revealing a strange complex just beyond the doorway.
What secrets lay within, he wondered.
A large glass cylinder dominated the center of the room, its pale blue glow casting the darkened lab in azure relief. He stared at it for a long moment before his gaze was drawn to a large wooden table opposite. There, their bodies crushed by a portion of the falling ceiling and scattered amidst a slew of papers, lay a pair of Marines.
Guards, then. That made this room even more interesting.
Making his way to the table, he cleared the 2 of them aside, uncaring for the wet squishy sounds they made. His Athenian lay with the papers. He sifted through the unintelligible notes as best he could and came up with a great many, something about water and human experiment stuck out in big bold letters.
Failure, it said. Subject too unstable.
Prone to emotional fits, irrationality, irritability, hysteria. Mass production not feasible, incompatible with devil fruits.
Recommend immediate termination of subject and project restart.
There were many more notes beneath it, but splotches of ink and blood had made them utterly unintelligible to his eyes. There was a name there though, or at least the first 2 letters of it.
Jew. That was it.
Beyond that, nothing legible.
But whatever was in this human-sized cylinder had to be interesting. Oh ho! Oh ho! A bright gleam shone in those dark sunglasses. This'll be nice. It'll suffice.
Wrapping the strange cylinder up with one of his many tentacles and the pile of papers in the other, he made for the exit, hoping that this prize would suffice.
He didn't even want to think of what Naruto might do to him if wasn't.
Death was coming for him. Its cold fingers traced his shoulders, its voice whispered in his ear.
It's time, it seemed to say. You've done enough. Just give in. Close your eyes. Rest.
Whitebeard could feel his insides burning, the organs screaming with each and every step he took.
This was it, then.
He was done, or so near to it, that he couldn't tell the difference anymore. His spirits remained the same, but his body had been all but blasted out by Akainu's last attack, internal damage that no modern medicine could hope to fix.
Even with that infernal woman's odd treatment, he didn't have long left. It certainly didn't help that he'd waged an almost single-handed war against almost the entire Marineford by himself in the hours since. In another time and place he would have fallen to Blackbeard by now, but with the latter gone, he found himself striding still forward upon the battlefield, surrounded by his most loyal soldiers. Today, he tasted the sweet fruit of victory. One never would have guessed it by looking at him, but Edward Newgate was dying. It could be seen there in the way his hand trembled around his halberd, the slight wheeze of his chest, and his glassy gaze. The Marine soldiers were still terrified of him though, and they'd every right to be. Even on his deathbed, Shirohige could end them in an instant.
With the Wraith's running interference, the Whitebeard pirates had made inroads to Marineford, the remaining vice-admirals proving no match for them without leadership. Even the warlords had fallen. Dracul Mihawk had tacitly withdrawn after his confrontation with Kenpachi Saraki, Gecko Moria was dead of a broken neck, and Don Flamingo Don Quixote was nowhere to be found.
Kuma appeared to have vanished as well, recalled by the world government once it became apparent that the Marines would lose, his whereabouts also unknown. Only Boa Hancock still fought on, injuring ally and enemy alike. And as for the admirals, he was fairly certain Hade met an even more disastrous fate than the Shichibukai.
A stray breeze alerted him to the presence of his grandson, but not to the twin bags he had belted to his waist.
Certainly not the contents within.
Newgate arched a grizzled brow as his descendant revealed them unto him, the bloodied heads of not only Akainu but Sengoku as well. A chorus of gasps arose from those men assembled, Marco and Jozu chief amongst them.
Damn, that was impressive. Especially. This new era really was something.
With those two dead and Kizaru captured, Akiji was left to command the battle alone, assuming he hadn't fallen as well.
It was ironic, really.
Shirohige had come here to rescue Ace, and here, his grandson alongside his crew had ended the war almost single-handedly. It nearly brought a tear to his eye. Gururarara, he rasped, wincing as his laughter dissolved into coughing.
That's a fine prize you've got there, boy. It makes me proud. You look shitty, Gramps.
There was just a touch of sorrow in his grandson's tone. Hell, he felt shitty. It had been so many years since he'd been beaten this badly, not since Roger. He could feel it in his bones. Death was calling his name, crooning to him in dulcet tones.
But not yet. There was still one thing left for him to do. With this in mind, Whitebeard knelt before his grandson, laying a large hand on the boy's head.
A tremor of power lanced down his massive arm, jutting out from his broken body and into the blonde. Naruto started as though he'd been struck, blue eyes widening every so slightly as the quivering fade. Shirohige seemed older somehow as he backed away, rising to his full towering height once more. It was as if something had been passed between grandfather and grandson, though only the former knew just what it truly was.
Well, that was weird.
Naruto muttered, glancing down at himself, finding no visible changes.
Did everything seem brighter, somehow? Marco frowned. Pops. Hush, my son.
Whitebeard soothed, wheezing slightly.
What's done is done.
His battered mustache curled questioningly.
What about Ace? Is he all right? He is. Naruto nodded in affirmation. I told him and Luffy to make for your ship. With luck. Pops. Holy crap. You look like shit.
A spiral of flame resolved into existence behind Naruto, causing the blonde to start in surprise. Port Gastillace at least had the courtesy to appear sheepish in the face of this sudden betrayal, scratching the back of his head at his elder's ire. That didn't spare him the crew's joy, however. A mighty chorus went up from them all. Before the young fireband could so much as blink, he found himself all but swept up in the arms of his comrades and kin.
Ace. Stubborn brat.
Naruto barked angrily at an aside, but the words were without rancor.
Didn't I tell you to stay with your brother? I was worried about the old man. And you think I wasn't? There are still Marines nearby. I'd rather you didn't get killed, thank you very much. I don't have to listen to you.
They would have continued like that for some time, were it not for Whitebeard himself.
Gururara, he rumbled, that aside, I think there's someone here who would like to have a word with you. Naruto blinked a bit that time, wondering who it might be.
Imagine his surprise when the whole of the Whitebeard pirates parted like the Red Sea, making way for a warm, smiling face that he hadn't seen since he was a child. Granted, he did have a scar on his eye that hadn't been there before, but it was the same face, all right.
And that voice. Looks like you've done some growing up, Naruto. Kushina would have been proud. His confusion was greeted with a warm, almost familiar smile. Naruto didn't even bother to ask about that massive galleon the man had doubtlessly arrived in, nor how the hell he'd managed to sneak into Marineford, undecked. He was suddenly a child again, asking his mother a very old question. "Who's that man, Mama?" And she would always answer. "He's your uncle, Naruto." I remember you." He'd never gotten a name out of his mother that one time he'd asked, but that face. Damn it, why was it so familiar? "Who in the hell are you and how do you know my mother?" The faceplant that followed would have been humorous in any other situation. "She never told you?" "No, she didn't." "Now who the hell are you and why are you here?" "Well, to make a long story short, I didn't really come here for you. I came to stop the fighting. But to answer your first question, I'm..." Naruto blinked, balking, as Shanks gave him two simple words. "My uncle." Uchiha Sasuke had seen many horrible things in lifetime. He'd heard of even more. But this was right up there with the worst. So much had been seen and done this day, foes beaten and slain, allies found and yet lost, but it all paled in comparison to what his Capitaine had brought them. It wasn't just one of the four emperors, red-haired Shanks apparently Naruto's uncle standing opposite him, or the fact that the former had somehow recruited a marine admiral as their doctor, said doctor being secretly more bloodthirsty than Kenpachi. Oh no, this was worse. Much worse. Because his Sunsho held two bloody bags tied to his belt. Sasuke didn't need his eyes to know what was in those bags. Just as he didn't need to know why Naruto had assembled them up here, in front of all these den mushi, each about to go live on the scaffold. Are those their heads? Shikamaru finished with a gulp. Oh, he's taken the heads, that means they're. Wham! B's rap ended with Mei's elbow implanted in his stomach. Hush! She soothed. Just look after that tube you found, dear. Seriously though, Tenten risked a nervous glance at the bags. You really want to do this? Yup. Naruto replied, touching the now bagged skulls of Akainu and Sengoku. And we're going to show them. Hashirama's deadpan was barely concealed, to the entire world. That's the plan, yeah. Not my idea, Tayuya immediately foisted the blame off on the blonde. Ararara, Akiji gasped, his body still pinned beneath Kenpachi's boot. I take it you mean to kill me, too? No. Naruto's answer surprised everyone, Shanks included. I actually respect you enough to let you live. The Marines are crippled, anyway. Kizaru will never see the light of day again, and with these two dead, maybe you and Garp can make a better go at it. If not, well, you'll see us again. Now, let him up, Zaraki. What? The madman growled, eyes bulging. But I was gonna kill him. I said let him up. He's not worth killing. Would you kindly? Retsu smiled serenely, the poor berserker jerked back as if he'd been burned, muttering something about crazy women and their medicine. That got Tayuya laughing, which made Tenten snicker, of course that earned a smile from Sasuke, provoking the rest to absolute laughter. Their mirth was short-lived however. When Naruto pulled the heads out of their sacks and activated the link, it was all business for what might have been the first time in his life. That same link reached the snails in Sabaody across the world, broadcasting his every word to eager and waiting reporters. Greetings, world. He addressed them, his words deep and booming. My name is Naruto. Naruto Newgate. Now, I'm sure some of you recognize me, just as some of you are not doubt wondering why the feed was cut so suddenly back there. Well, I'm here to tell you what happened, the truth. See these heads? He jerked to Kainu and Sengoku for emphasis. This is not an illusion. This is not a mistake. Your precious fleet admiral, the man you all cherish so dearly, is dead. So is Admiral Akainu. Your dear Kizaru will never see the light of day. Akiji lives only because of my mercy. And the Marines? Your precious admirals? Shichibukai? Hate to break to you, but they've lost. We've won. Port Gasti Ace is alive. Don't believe me? See for yourself. Still smiling, he beckoned Ace in from off-screen. Firefist reluctantly stepped into view, looking none too pleased about it. Now do you see? Those few that aren't dead have retreated or surrendered, just as some of your precious Marines already have. Your warlords are dead, or have fled. Now, some of you may be wondering, what if he's lying? What if this is all a hoax? Well, let me assure you, do you see Marineford behind me? A beautiful landmark, no? Watch. Even as he spoke, he raised the Shikisaiken and slashed down, the invisible wave of wind carving up and through the massive building. There was a moment of terrible silence as the gauntlet has been thrown down. Your era is over, world government. Yes, you've all done a wonderful job. A disembodied voice patronized. Just as I knew you would. Naruto froze. With a flick of his wrist, he cut the feed. Did you hear that? He hissed. Once more, the wraiths froze. Froze, as a familiar shape resolved itself out of the gloom, shape and form manifesting from the nothingness to assume the guise of a man in a red-clouded cloak. A masked man. The very same man who had freed him from Impel Down and started this very hell in the first place. Isn't that? Mohohuhu, the masked man chuckled hoarsely, a gloved hand lingering over the orange facade that covered his visage. Thank you, for all that you've done, Naruto-kun. Truly. I honestly didn't expect you to form such a gallery of rogues when I broke you out, let alone weaken the Marines this much. Congratulations on your victory. Such a shame that so many had to die to see this day won. Naruto bristled. How dare he speak of that? Oi oi, a strong hand clasped his shoulder, Shanks' palm the only thing restraining him from lashing out. His uncle surprise had arrived here and the end of the battle at the loss of so many, to effectively bring the war of the best to a close. The last living link to his mother excluding Whitebeard standing here beside him. Don't let him get to you, kid. My thanks to you as well, Red Hair. The stranger laughed loudly, the lone eye of his mask turning to regard the emperor. It is only fitting that you of all people, be here to witness this. The day the world government was brought low, down to its knees. The day I abolished it and gave rise to a new world. Keh. Zaraki snorted. What the hell is he blabbering about? You know this guy, Naruto? Retsu frowned as well, her mouth downturned in silent approval. In a way, yes. Who the hell is this fucker? Tayuya hissed. Ararara, Akiji's weak gasp merely confirmed his disagreement. Whoever you are, that will work. I'm still here. Marines and pirates alike glanced about, wondering just who this masked madman was. Who he claimed to be. My name is Uchiha Madara. The man introduced himself, and I bid you all welcome to the dawn of a new era. His voice rang out loudly across the yard, speaking to all assembled. A new organization, one truly dedicated to world peace. To prosperity. A world where no one will suffer. Where there are no losers, only the winners. Long have I strived from shadows to reach this goal, and now you, each and every one of you, shall see it come to fruition. The name of this organization, you ask? Why, it is none other than Akatsuki. Madara? Hashirama's face had gone entirely pale. No, that's not possible. I killed Madara myself nearly 100 years ago. He shouldn't be alive. You're an imposter. Am I? The masked man merely laughed. Do I look dead to you? New era? Naruto finally found his voice, eyes flashing a dangerous red. World peace? You know what I think of that, as a pirate? Do tell. To hell with that bullshit. There was a silence. I thought you might say that. The masked man remained eerily calm. But it doesn't matter, UVE changed things. There's no going back. To the world, you're more than just a pirate, you've kicked the government's teeth in, they'll be howling for blood, not just yours, but everyone associated with you. Make an enemy of me now, and you'll only regret it in the end. His words ended as Naruto's hockey-infused blade slipped into his stomach and passed through empty air. He stumbled forward, blinking as his arm, and then his entire body simply phased right through his opponent, all too easily. As if this man didn't even exist. A subsequent attack by Hashirama and Sasuke met with similar effects, both men simply ghosted through the vagabond like he wasn't even there. Nothing touched him, not even a single needle from Tenten so much as grazed his mask. What the hell? What's wrong, red hair? The masked man mocked. Aren't you going to help them? Not at all. Shanks simply smiled. My nephew has everything under control. Does he now? Madara scoffed. I fail to see how. Ting. A hiss left his lips as a piece of his mask flew away, exposing the upper left side of his face. A thin sliver of blood trailed down his exposed cheek. So, you can be hurt. Naruto barked, lowering his hand as the masked man raised his own to cover his exposed visage. Good. If you can be hurt, then you can bleed. Such a shame. Madara sighed softly. I had hoped you were smarter than that, apparently not. Very well. If you refuse to see the glory of the Moon's-Eye plan, then so be it. You shall see soon enough. I know you may think your crew to be unmatched, but compared to my organization, to me, to the New World, they are nothing. You could have joined me and achieved peace, but now you will know the horror of terror and despair. Time and space bent inwards even as Sasuke's Amaterasu swarmed over him, his body vanishing back from when it came. A lone red-eye burned out against them in challenge, adding further to his words. I'll see you again, Uzumaki Naruto. And with that, he was gone. And a new chapter began. Preview. Naruto wept. Grief was a constant companion, lingering heavily on his shoulder. But there was also anger. Rage. He'd done so much, fought so hard, and in the end, it didn't even matter. Yes, their bounties were now sky-high after what he and his crew had done to Marineford, but what did it matter? The old man was dead. After all he'd said and done, Whitebeard was gone. Dead. He'd succumbed to his injuries only hours after Madara's answer of war, declaration of Akatsuki. And all he had to remember him was this strange tingling in his arms. Whatever Whitebeard had done to him before death had seemingly transferred the power of the Gura no Mi to him, but that knowledge only made him wander deeper into the bowels of the Moby Dick, their temporary base, while the crew recovered from their wounds. As soon as they were up and about, he resolved to be away from here. He just could not bring himself to be on Whitebeard's ship. He just couldn't. When the old man had gone, he just looked so peaceful. Now the world knew who his grandson was. And they wanted him gone. To hell with that, he needed to get to Water 7. Build a ship of their own. Just forget about this awful mess. Eventually, he stumbled upon it in the cargo hold. The strange cylinder bee had absconded from Marineford. The fluid within it moved eerily back and forth now, almost as though it were seeking something. The surface of the tube was cool to the touch, almost soothing. Hello? Cammy. Without thinking, he struck the transparent tube with all his might, lashed out with a boot to shatter the glass. Water gushed forth from the wound, spouting in nearly every direction, most of it onto him. He glared at it, bloody red daggers, as though he could somehow wreak his weariness out upon the liquid. Imagine his surprise when the water began to move. Droplets slip-a-ped off his soaked form, dripped from the walls and ceiling, pooling rapidly before his feet as he looked down, trailing down his body until not a single bit of moisture was left. What in the world? As he looked on, resolved itself into the shape of a woman. A very naked woman, her heart-shaped face framed by sea blue hair, the long locks plastered to either side of her face, her bright eyes gazing befuddledly about in a vain search for something. She didn't even try to cover herself, instead her gaze roamed the room, as though she looked lost, somehow. He coughed quietly and she turned to face him, the helpless look contained deep within her sight struck a chord deep within him. "Who or what are you?" Naruto muttered. She uttered one word, then. Her own name. Juvia. The blonde sweat dropped slightly. "Well then, it's, nice to meet you, Juvia. The name's Naruto." "Naruto-sama. Why me?" That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.